Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much again, just on behalf of the network, for your continued participation. It's really fantastic. It's really fantastic to have you all here with us. So we will be going into our third session, where we'll be looking at whistleblower protection in Africa. Just as an introduction, my name is Folashade Edjamer. I am a lecturer in law at the University of Reading, and I teach and research in the area of banking regulation and whistleblower protection. And so this area that I'm moderating today is quite dear to me because it's an area that I really enjoy researching on. I am moderating today from Lagos, so I do apologize if my network is slightly sketchy. It has been raining all morning today, so I do apologize. In the event that my internet connection goes off, one of the other conference organizers will step in and assist me. So today we have two speakers, and I'll introduce the first speaker, Mr. Joseph Antwi Boasiko. So Joseph will be presenting first. Joseph is currently working with GIZ Ghana as an accountability advisor, where he supports the implementation of activities with accountability institution in Ghana, including the Ghana Audit Service, the Internal Audit Agency, and the civil society organizations, Ghana Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, and other accountability institutions. He has also worked as a research and teaching assistant in the Department of Public Administration and Health Services Management at University of Ghana, their business school. He holds a Master of Philosophy in Public Administration, is mainly focused on issues of accountability, and he has published papers on accountability institutions and how they promote public financial accountability. Some of these articles can be found in the Journal of Legislative Studies, Development in Practice, Brazilian Journal of Public Administration, International Journal of Public Administration, amongst others. In his leisure time, he likes to watch movies and playing hockey and listening to music. So over.
Thank you very much, Fola, for the kind introduction that you gave. So I am speaking on whistleblowing in Ghana, but I'm looking at the focus on why people refuse to blow their whistle. And I'll try as much as possible to link it to the whistleblower protection. That is the theme for this session. Yes, so we can start now. Yeah, so there are people in Ghana and around the world have so many reasons why they decide to blow the whistle. And amongst them are people who just blow the whistle to alert the public. Others do it to protect the environment. There are so many reasons that people decide to blow the whistle. People do it to promote even a dialogue. You have civil society organizations and individuals advocating for people to continuously blow the whistle so that people will be courageous. People also do it just to make a difference. They want to be counted that, okay, this fraud that was happening, I was the one who brought it out, and I was the one who saved the country a lot of money. So if you come to Ghana, fortunately, Ghana is amongst one of the few African countries that has an established whistleblowers protection, whistleblowers law. And if you look at the Act 720 of Parliament of the Republic of Ghana, that was done in 2006. That act is there purposely for whistleblowing in Ghana. And then the main objective of the act is there to provide for the manner in which individuals may, in their public interest, disclose information that relates to unlawful or other illegal conducts of corrupt practices of others. And interestingly, the act provides that people do not just wait for something to happen. The act provides that people can make disclosures before, people can make disclosures when the act is happening, and people can make disclosures after the act has happened. And again, the act also provides so many ways that people will be protected against victimization when they decide to blow the whistle. And something that I will go into more, the act also provides for a fund that people can access, or that should be given to people in case they blow the whistle and then the state is able to accrue some amount of money. This is something that I'll go into, so I won't waste much time here. Yes, so in the Whistleblowers Act in Ghana, there are 6 places or 6 areas that the Whistleblowers Act provides that people can blow the whistle on. So the number 1 is on economic crime. People are admonished to blow whistle on economic crime. And as I mentioned, they do not have to wait for that act to happen. People can blow it when the act is about to be committed, or when they feel that an act is likely to be committed, or when the act is being committed. So they have all these 3 options. They don't have to wait for something to happen before they blow the whistle. The other part is that they can blow the whistle on if they think somebody is proceeding to break a law, any law of Ghana. If they feel that somebody is about to do something like that, the act admonishes citizens of Ghana to go ahead and blow the whistle on that. And if they feel there is being a miscarriage of justice, they are admonished to blow the whistle on that. And again, if they feel that there's a public institution that is likely or is mismanaging the public funds, the act admonishes people to go ahead and blow the whistle on that. And if they feel that the health and safety of people are being endangered, the people are also admonished to blow the whistle on that. Yes, so the act has made it very simple for anybody to blow the whistle. So you do not have to wait and say that I do not have access to any personality that I intend to blow the whistle to. The act has made so many provisions on the people or the institutions that somebody can blow the whistle to. It has been decentralized as much as possible that you can go ahead and blow the whistle to your family head. So if you see that something is happening, you just walk into your family head, and the act mandates that you blow the whistle to the family head. You can even walk to any religious institution, any church that is close to you. You blow the whistle to the person, and then it's now the person's responsibility to go through the processes of making sure that the whistle that you are blowing gets to the appropriate institution. So there are so many people, there are so many institutions that citizens of Ghana can just proceed to blow the whistle. It goes from that low to the president. So you can start from the least. If you're not getting any hearing, you can proceed to the minister, a parliamentarian, your district executive. You can proceed to all of that to blow the whistle to even the president. So that is how decentralized the whistleblowing in Ghana has been made according to the act. So how are people supposed to do that? How are people supposed to blow the whistle in Ghana? The act has established a process, an entire process where people can go ahead to blow the whistle. So I'm saying that if you can read and write, the act admonishes that you can blow the whistle in writing. Or if you cannot read and write, the act admonishes that you can go ahead to the people that I listed earlier to go and then blow the whistle to orally. And then it is then up to them to take the necessary steps to send it to the appropriate authorities. But interestingly, talking about whistleblowers protection, in Ghana's law, by the time that the law was being established, the act says that if you blow the whistle to any of the people that I mentioned, the person is supposed to take your name, the person is supposed to take your address, and the person is supposed to take your occupation, and put all of them in writing before submitting it to the appropriate step. And then talking about whistleblowers protection, if you are blowing the whistle and somebody is taking your name, then it is going to be a whole lot of issue. So that is where the issue is, and then that is where the other issues are. So that is number one of the deficiencies that I think I can list about the act. Number two, if you do that, then what is the next line of action? What happens is that the person is supposed to keep a receipt of the time and the place where you blew the whistle, and then that is there for the person to submit it to the Attorney General within 7 working days. And after that, the Attorney General is supposed to cause an investigation within 60 days. And then within the 60 days, the Attorney General is therefore supposed to submit it within 60 days to apply to the courts. And in case, so if there is a delay in the investigations that they cause, then they are the institution that the Attorney General acts mandated to perform that is supposed to write back to the Attorney General, explaining to them whether they were successful with the investigations that they did, or they were not successful. They are supposed to give a report to the Attorney General, and then after that, investigations that were submitted to him, and then give recommendations in that regard. Next, please. Yeah, so in the Act, you can see that the Section 12, subsection 2 of the Act states a lot of hazards that anybody who is trying to blow the whistle will go through. And it lists them as the person can be dismissed, the person can be suspended, the person can be declared redundant, among other things. So any person who decides to blow the whistle, a promotion. So the Act admonishes all of that, and then tries to give the provisions where if somebody is going through what the person is supposed to do. So there are so many reasons why people will decide to refuse to blow the whistle, even though there's an Act. So many case studies in Ghana that depicts these reasons. So I'm going to talk about former Minister of Youth and Sports, who during his period was supposed to travel on a trip, and then he sent people that were who did not have anything to do to the trip. And when he came back, what happened was that the Director of Finance of the Ministry of Youth and Sports, then with another person, decided that, okay, this minister is mismanaging state resources. What can we do? So they decided to blow the whistle to the president. And you know what happened? What happened was that instead of the president punishing the minister, what happened was that the people who blew the whistle were rather asked to proceed on leave for no offense done. They were asked to proceed on leave while the minister was there, and their reason was that they were going to cause an investigation. I mean, ideally, if you're going to cause such an investigation, what you should do is that you should make the minister rather proceed on leave and leave the people who will be able to provide you with the necessary information that you need. But that was the opposite. So, I mean, if somebody is there and the person listens to some of these things, it is therefore going to demotivate evidence to still decide not to blow the whistle. So there are so many reasons. This is just one of them because of time, just to indicate a lot of reasons why people may decide to blow the whistle. Yes, and there's this study that KPMG did, also depicting some of the reasons why people still decide to not blow the whistle, even if they have a lot of admissible evidence. Yes, so these are some of the reasons. I mean, because of time, I can't go a lot deep into it. But this, if you try, I mean, it shows perfectly that people are afraid of the hazards or the victimization that come with whistleblowing. And for these reasons, people may decide not to blow the whistle. Next, please. Next, please. Yes, full slide, please. Full. Yes, full. Just complete. All right. So when people are victimized, there are a lot of options that are available to them for them to proceed and then take actions against that. So they have the option to reporting to STRAT. They have the option of making a court action. And even if you blow the whistle and then something comes out of it, the Act mandates that you are given a police protection for your family, for your friends, and family include your wife, your children, your immediate family members. And then you can also take a civil or criminal action. And if there's any suit against you, the Act is there to protect you. Next, please. So I can start rounding up. Yes, and I mentioned the fund that people can have access to. So if you are able to make any revelations that brings about resources that helps the state to save any kind of resources, you are entitled to 10% of that revenue. And then, I mean, this is a form to motivate people to also proceed to build a vessel. Next, please. Next, please. So yes, what is the way forward? The way forward is that, I mean, institutions in Ghana, next please. So the way forward is that now people, with the advent of social media and other things, people are trying to appreciate the digital platforms used for whistleblowing, which, I mean, many scholars can trace it back to WikiLeaks, the advent of WikiLeaks, among other things. So that is where, I mean, Ghana is also trying to adapt things like that. Next. Next, please. Yes, so there are a lot of platforms coming up that is trying to keep whistleblowing anonymous, among other things. So you have this coalition of civil society organizations against corruption that have come together for this purpose. And then the last one is that the Ghana Audit Service, that is the Supreme Audit Institution of Ghana, has also come up with an app that GIZ supported them with. That is called the Citizens Eye app. And then the app is a kind of a whistleblowing platform that people can just go there, report issues of services that are being rendered to them. And then they are also able to rate institutions with the services. So the audit service therefore picks a lot of information from there and therefore proceed to follow up on their audits, among other things. So in short, I mean, this is how things are turning now in Ghana. The act is becoming a bit of, because of the non-anonymity issues on the act, these platforms are coming up as a way forward for whistleblowing in Ghana. And then, I mean, the continuous use of this app by citizens is promoting a lot of whistleblowing issues in Ghana. I think I'll have to end here and then stand by for the necessary questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for that insightful presentation. I think one of the things that is clear is that Ghana is one of the first countries, at the very least, to actually implement some kind of act to protect whistleblowers. And I suspect that we will have some questions on that in a little while. So our next speaker and final speaker for this session is Dr. Edjamer Ojobo. Hi, Edjamer. Edjamer is a lecturer in law at Coventry University. Her research interest is centered around law and development in developing economies. Edjamer is also interested in social legal research, in particular the interplay between legal and social institutions and how these institutions are created. As part of her research, Edjamer considers issues such as finance, property rights, enforcement of contracts, corruption as social issues, and the means of tackling corruption such as it. Over to you, Edjamer, if you just unmute yourself, please.
Thank you, Paula, for that introduction. So in this presentation, I am going to go through an overview of the current framework in Nigeria. I will also consider whether a moral duty is enough to actually encourage whistleblowers to speak up, somewhere along the lines of our previous speaker, Joseph. I will also be considering the whistleblowing stopgap policy of 2016, which was implemented in Nigeria, and I will be considering the effectiveness of that policy. After that, I will move forward to an examination of the Whistleblowing Protection Bill of 2019, which is the current bill being considered to provide statutory backing for the protection of whistleblowers in Nigeria. Next slide, please. Now, till date, Nigeria is without a whistleblowing legislation. And by the time I say without a whistleblowing legislation, I'm looking at that overall comprehensive law that offers protections to whistleblower. Now, this doesn't mean that whistleblowers are currently left without protection, but rather it is fragmented across different pieces of legislation. For example, the 1999 Constitution, and in particular, Section 39, which actually protects the freedom to impart information. Now, Section 39 of the Constitution is not particularly does not particularly reference whistleblower, but at least it does embody the spirit of whistleblowing and offers some protection for whistleblowing in Nigeria. Other than the Constitution, we also have the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Offences Related Act, and in particular, Section 64 of the Act actually provides for the protection of the identity of whistleblowers. Now, this ICPC Act has actually been considered as the start of whistleblowing protection in Nigeria. And if you go further down into sections 63 sub 3, it actually makes punishable the act of a whistleblower perhaps given false or misleading information. Now, other than the ICPC Act, we also have the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission Act of 2004. Again, if you look at the provisions of Section 39, it does offer some protection to whistleblowers. And other than that, we also have Section 27 of the Freedom of Information Act, which protects public officers or persons who act on behalf of the public of public institutions, and it protects them from civil and criminal proceedings where and when they reveal information. Now, going into the stopgap policy of 2016 and the whistleblowing protection bill, we'll discuss that in more detail. But before we, because with the stopgap policy, we now see an active step to actually provide some form of protection for whistleblowers. And this culminated in the creation of the 2019 bill, which we'll examine in detail. Next slide, please. But before we examine the policy and the bill, I think it's first relevant to reflect on whether a moral duty is actually enough to actually make a whistleblower step forward or speak up when they witness wrongdoing. And perhaps this is the direction that the 2016 stopgap policy and the 2019 bill actually considered, because it kind of influences or it kind of justifies the direction that the bill has taken. Now, it can be said that a whistleblower often risks so much when they decide to speak up. And this can often be dismissal, loss of income, loss of reputation, stress, intimidation, and possible retaliation. Considering that all these factors are present, it then becomes, what do they stand to gain other than the fact that, yes, they've maybe exposed corruption, they've exposed wrongdoing, but because they take on so much risk, do we now need to consider whether something more should be given to them when they speak up? Next slide, please. Now, this whistleblowing stopgap policy was actually aimed at encouraging and reporting the mismanagement and misappropriation of public funds. And it also covered issues such as corruption, collecting and soliciting of bribes, and fraud. Now, this stopgap policy, which came in December 2016, actually introduced the concept of rewarding whistleblowers where there has been a successful recovery of funds. So again, if they decide to speak up, there's some sort of reward at the end of it. For me, I think this is an interesting moral question, at least for myself and perhaps you as the audience listening into this. Perhaps we need to consider whether rewarding whistleblowers is actually the right approach, or whether do you think as an audience, as someone listening in, whether it actually creates and provokes incentives? Because while we do want the whistleblower to speak up because there is a moral obligation, they have witnessed wrongdoing, do you think that the introduction of financial reward kind of distorts that, or it doesn't really matter and the end justifies the means? At the end of the day, we're exposing corruption, we're exposing wrongdoing, and it makes the country a better place. I think I'll leave you with that question to ponder on. I'll leave you with that question to ponder on, but next slide, please. Now, since the policy has been put in place in 2016, there has actually been several recoveries. So at this point, we're now looking at the effectiveness of the policies and of the stopgap policy, and recoveries have been made in different amounts, about £13 million, up to $378 million. Now, in terms of the communications and tips that they've received since the policy came in place, now this data is as at the last update. Now, since the policy had been created, they've received over 11,000 communications, 1,000 tips. There's definitely been some investigations, and about 600 of those have been completed, and about 12 prosecutions and 4 convictions. Now, I would add here that on the 23rd of June, the same body, that's AfriMil and Cora, who did this first survey after the stopgap policy came out, have indicated that they're conducting a new survey, because as at now, this is 5 years on since the policy came out, and they're conducting a new survey to basically assess the impact of the policy now that we're nearing the 5-year mark. Now, from what I've seen, that the policy is going to target 6 particular states, and they're going to survey about 7,000 respondents. And definitely it will involve key informants like anti-graft agencies, media, civil society, and the group, just to get their responses, their perception around whistleblowing, and the impact of the policy around whistleblowing, and whether it has actually enhanced or improved the situation. I look forward to the conclusion of that report, but as of now, this is an ongoing survey that is currently happening. Next slide, please. Now, again, it's still a question of how effective has the law been so far. While we wait for the report of the survey, some things we can definitely consider so far, some things we have definitely seen since more whistleblowers have actually stepped forward, is that there has been little or no protection towards reprisals from when they do speak up. And I have 2 cases in mind. First, the case of Aliyu Ibrahim, who reported contract fraud within his organization and was fired. Now, as at the last update in terms of his situation, he was still fighting for reinstatement after being fired for speaking up about whistleblowing. Then we also have the situation of Intia Thompson, who was fired for reporting the misappropriation of funds of over $200,000 in his organization. Now, Thompson's situation is interesting because while he did fight the case, he was reinstated. And after he was reinstated, he now suffered victimization within his organization. The victimization was so bad that Thompson himself now had to be moved to another department, even though within the company. So again, we're seeing, yes, there may be some rewards to for whistleblowers, but in terms of the protection after they whistleblow, I think the legislation or the law or the policy does not actually serve to create that protection. Now, another thing we can say in terms of the effectiveness of the policy and the current legislation in place is when it comes to payment. Now, when the policy first came out, in the initial stages, there were a few hiccups around actually paying the whistleblowers, because the policy actually set the threshold as to the reward very high. It depended, I think, 2.5% if it's under £1 billion, and over 5% if it's less, if it's more than. And it turned out in some situations where the money they had recovered was so large, the reward going to the whistleblower was so large in itself. And there was actually a situation where they felt that one particular whistleblower who was supposed to receive his reward would not be able to effectively manage it. But I think those were the initial hiccups at the start of the policy, but some of these issues have been corrected. But I think the messaging needs to be quite clear that if you've provided valuable information, credible information that actually leads to the recovery of funds, you will be paid your money. So the messaging around payment actually needs to be very clear, just to give that effectiveness to the policy. Next slide, please. Now, closing the gap. Now, this is where we now go into the Whistleblowing Protection Bill, which now seeks to provide that comprehensive legislation and gives statutory backing to the stopgap policy and the idea that whistleblowers should be compensated where they provide credible information. Now, on first reading of the bill, a review of it already shows that it actually does not cover for the protection of whistleblowers' identity. Now, we can make the argument that this is already covered under the IPC Act, where we looked at section 64, which already says the whistleblower's identity should be protected. But I mean, if you're going into creating a legislation which should be specifically for whistleblower protection, then you need to make it as comprehensive as possible. So I think an addition of that protection of identity into the bill is very relevant if we're looking at this statute, if we're going to look at this bill as the ultimate protection for whistleblowers in the country. Now, again, a good feature of the bill is that it actually now extends the scope of the stopgap policy, because if you look at the stopgap policy was more concerned with people blowing the whistle within the public sector. Now, the bill now extends this to the private sector again. So we're now looking at the extension of whistleblowing protection to those in the private sector, giving them the ability to speak up. Now, when it comes to whistleblowing protection, a person is protected as long as making disclosure, they reasonably believe that the information that they have given is true at the time. Now, section 16 is interesting because it also provides for the punishment by 1 year imprisonment or a fine of 100,000 naira, so I think about 142 pounds, if a whistleblower gives misleading information. It's also interesting to note that section 424 of this act now punishes or does not remove liability from anyone who has been involved in the corrupt practice and decides to whistleblow. Again, it's an interesting section, at least to me it is an interesting section in the sense that sometimes you often find that people who have actually been involved, perhaps through a relationship, through work colleagues, or they basically have access to the most credible information. Now, with the inclusion of section 24 saying that, yet once you're involved in the whistleblowing, even if you choose to speak up, you will still be held accountable for your action. I often wonder whether it actually will now serve as a barrier to people speaking up, or people who've realized their wrongdoing coming forward. But I can see that it's a very morally gray area because, I mean, they were part of it. So why should they escape liability because they kind of just realized what they've done is wrong and they will not want to blow the whistle? But I don't know whether the inclusion of that section at this stage would be a good thing or a bad thing. Now, some improvements that the bill has actually taken into consideration, perhaps, again, this is a pure speculation on my part, perhaps because true of the Intia Thompson situation or the Aliyu Ibrahim situation, is that it now offers protection for whistleblowers in terms of victimization. And you can see this protection under section 18 of the new bill. And again, it says where there has been victimization, the whistleblower is protected from reprisal, and the person who has victimized the whistleblower would be liable for 2 years imprisonment or 3,000 naira fine. So again, we're seeing where it takes a bit more seriously that victimization and offering a further protection to whistleblower. Another interesting thing about the bill is that under the provisions of it, it actually provides that a whistleblower can actually seek police protection and they would be entitled to police protection. So I'm guessing they are envisioning the idea that, okay, this may be a sensitive political issue, perhaps maybe a whistleblower is coming forward to speak on maybe some political matter, and they're saying, well, if it's perhaps it's that kind of situation, you would be entitled to police protection while the case is investigated, while the conduct is going. So I think that's a very good and interesting section. Now, in terms of what the bill perhaps lacks again, is under section 4 of the bill, it only provides for external mechanisms to actually report whistleblowing. And again, to keep things more balanced, I think that internal mechanisms are also essential when it comes to whistleblowing protection, rather than having to go outside the organization, go out, perhaps a provision that actually includes internal mechanisms, maybe appointing someone within the organization, making it a requirement to appoint someone within the organization, public or private, to receive whistleblowing complaints, so that easy communication would be there. Now, overall, I think if this bill is finally implemented, it would be a great addition. It would be a great contributor to the drive forward for whistleblowing protection in Nigeria. But the bill itself, it's still not without its issues. And one final point, on the final point that I would note, is that this bill has been going on since 2019. And quite frankly, if we are to take the government seriously as to their interest in fighting corruption and actually protecting whistleblowers, I would assume that there should be more of a rush to actually implement this, because this has been hanging on for such a long time. I can only speculate as to why there has been delay in the implementation of the bill, but overall, I do not think it's a good look, considering the stopgap policy came out in 2016. This bill came out 3 years after, and it's been hanging on for 2 years. But overall, there are positive things coming out from Nigeria in terms of the overall protection of whistleblowers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edjamer. So hopefully you guys can see me again. My sketchy internet, I must apologize. Thank you very much for a really insightful presentation. We've had, I think we're actually doing quite well for time, so we'll probably be able to take quite a few questions. And we've had a number of questions and comments. Joseph, if I can start with you first. So we have a question here for you, Joseph. Is there not a significant risk of hacking with digital whistleblowing? Joseph?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. I mean, there are so many risks when it comes to that. Starting from the WikiLeaks that I even mentioned, I mean, and tracing it down to a lot of things that are happening around, and especially in Ghana. There are so many associated risks that comes with that. But you try and compare and contrast against somebody walking in to say, okay, I'm seeing somebody doing this, and you do a cost benefits analysis of both, and then a lot of people argue that why not let us move towards the direction of digital whistleblowing despite the hacks. So for the hacks, there are so many risks that comes with that, but I think it is a little bit minimized than the working to blow the whistle. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I believe we have a second question for you. Also, you have said that a key factor in employees not partaking in whistleblowing is their perception and distrust in that no action will be taken about their report. Can digital whistleblowing overcome this?
Yes, yes, rightly so. I mean, the main purpose of the digital whistleblowing is mainly to look at the anonymity issues. So, for instance, if I'm able to pick my phone in an organization, I can just sit somewhere and send and blow the whistle about something that is happening. I know nobody is seeing me. I think it will motivate people to go ahead and then blow the whistle in that regard, rather than somebody having to work in somewhere to blow the whistle. So that is the other issue when it comes to that.
Thank you. I forgot I put myself on mute. I'll just go to Edjamer next and then come back to you with a couple of questions. So Edjamer, Nigeria has made several attempts to implement a whistleblower bill, but has been unsuccessful. Please, can you shed some more light on why this might be?
I think that's an interesting question, and one to which I can only speculate on. And that's just the reality of the Nigerian process and the bureaucracy. Again, I think if I were to speculate, or if I were to assume, I think there's just a lack of political will to actually get these laws implemented. And there's a lot of talk about the fight against corruption and it being a less corrupt government. But if you're actually serious about some of these issues, then these are the policies that should be getting in place, rather than focusing, for example, if you've watched the news lately, you've seen a lot of information about the CBN and taxations of what do they call them? All these companies and digital marketing companies. I think that's where their priority is. The government itself is mostly rent seeking and looking to fill their pockets, and rather their agenda may not be anti-corruption as they like to tout, but rather they're more focused on getting monies into their pocket, because we can see how quickly those bills and those legislations have been passed, while this has actually been lingering since 2019. So this is my own speculation, but I would just simply say it's a lack of seriousness or political will when it comes to actually getting the right policies done, because this may not always put in the money that they're looking for into their accounts. And again, we're also looking at the possibility of some of them being implicated in this situation. And why would you shoot yourself in the foot? I think that's it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that last point, because I believe the Whistleblower Protection Bill, there was a 2007 one, and I think there was a 2011 one, and now we're at 2019. And the question really is, many of these people might be implicated. So I suppose you can kind of see why they would be reluctant to do so. Thank you. And I have one more question for you. In a country like Nigeria, where the implementation system is poor, laws are considered toothless bulldogs that can only bark but cannot bite. What is the hope of a whistleblower despite the existence of its protective laws?
So it's one of two things for me, and that's why I'm very...
Did you get that question?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Paula. I think it's one of two things for me, and that's where I am very pro rewarding whistleblowers, because we know, again, I think that's why I started with the conversation of whether the moral duty to act is often enough. And it may not be, given the Nigerian context. And if at the end of the day, we're saying, well, at least there's some sort of reward for this risk that you're taking, because if, for example, a whistleblower like Intia Thompson or Liu Ibrahim, they've lost their jobs, they've lost the ability to support their family or care for their loved ones. If there is some sort of element rewarding them despite this loss, I think that is a good thing, as long as the money is being paid to them. So that is a sentimental approach, but perhaps they could consider creating special courts to actually tackle these issues. Because if you're looking for higher conviction rates, we know the Nigerian court system is quite slow, quite ineffective, matters can drag on. Perhaps like they created the National Industrial Court to deal with specific employment issues. While they're creating this whistleblower bills, they can create special courts where cases around whistleblowing go directly to those courts, and perhaps this can actually speed up the prosecution of whistleblowers and raise the conviction rates, rather than relying on what is already in place. Some would argue that, again, this is kind of duplicating the systems, and we already have enough of that, or already have an issue with that in Nigeria. But personally, I think it's one of the two options. Happy to stick with the rewards, but if you're looking for better conviction rates, you need to create a special court where these matters go directly to. These are not being considered elsewhere. And on the part of the government, I think it will show some sign of seriousness. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. I think I agree with the idea of a specialist court. I know that in my own research, I've certainly talked about it, specialist courts for banking law matters. So I think possibly that maybe for whistleblower issues, that might be something that could work. So thank you for that. Joseph, we have a question for you. Ghana has done well to introduce this Whistleblower Act and is arguably one of the few countries to make this bold move. How effective would you say the law is practically?
Yes, so on that question, I mean, I have seen some parts of the law working at some instances, and I've seen some people also being victimized, notwithstanding the existence of the act. So in practice, so for instance, the case study that I mentioned, you know, at the end of the whole proceed on leave thing, the people went to courts, and then based on the Whistleblowers Act, the courts forced the organization to reinstate them. So on that part, we could say that the act is being effective. But on the other parts, and there are a lot of people, other case studies, people who've lost their jobs, people who are victimized, among other things. So, I mean, in practice, I could say some parts of the law is working, other parts of the law, you can't say much about it. So let me say 50-50. Let me choose that. Yeah.
A very diplomatic answer, thank you. And we'll take one final question, which is for Edjamer. What is your opinion about a whistleblower under the protection framework getting an award for fraud where he was threatened to admit? What is your opinion about a whistleblower under the protection framework getting an award for fraud where he was threatened or pressured? I'm not sure about that question, but hopefully you understand. If not, perhaps the person could word the question.
Yeah, perhaps they can reward the question, please, because I'm not quite sure.
Okay, so for that question, if the person could please kindly reword it for us, then Edjamer would be more than happy, I believe, I'm speaking on her behalf, to answer it in the chat. So I think we're coming to the end of this session now. Okay, so we're coming to the end of this session now. I'd like to thank both of our speakers, Joseph and Edjamer, for a very insightful session. I certainly have taken quite a lot away, and I hope that our speakers have, our attendees have also. So thank you very much.